So who else was like me as a kid? Get the cereal box and play the little games on the back of the cereal box. Sometimes it's, or a lot of times it's find the hidden messages and words and different things like that. I love doing that as a kid. Fast forward to an adulthood, or to an adult, not to an adulthood. Fast forward to an adult, and I find myself playing Find the Conspiracy. And you know what? I like it. I like it. I don't hide from it. I like conspiracies. I don't know why. I like them. Not the ones that's just, well, maybe I do. I don't know. I'm still figuring it out. This is all still new to me. All right. This video here is 10 of the strangest TV show conspiracy mysteries ever. Let's get into it.
Most of us spend our evenings relaxing in front of the television watching our favorite shows, such as sitcoms, dramas, or even cartoons. Some of these shows have excellent and engaging storylines that keep viewers glued to their screens. But fans of some TV series have come up with a few theories of their own that paint these shows in a completely new light, and some of them are beyond strange. Number 10. Futurama is considered by many people to be one of the greatest sci-fi cartoon series ever created. Produced by the same people who created The Simpsons, it centers around a man, Philip J. Fry, who gets frozen on New Year's Eve of 1999, only to wake up 1,000 years later to a world that he no longer recognizes. The first friend that he makes is a robot named Bender, and as the series continues, they become inseparable. But while Fry does his best to adjust to his new surroundings, Bender is more focused on committing crimes, breaking all the rules, and drinking as much alcohol as he can get his hands on. But there's a theory that Bender wasn't always this way. During the show's pilot, which was aired for the first time in March of 1999, Fry is pursued by Leela, a female Cyclops, who intends to implant him with a chip that will label him as a delivery boy for the rest of his life. Unwilling to accept his fate, Fry flees with Bender by his side, but they soon become cornered, and the only way out is for Bender to bend the bars in front of a window. Fry suggests this plan, but Bender informs him that he's only able to bend girders, since this is what he was programmed to do. As he walks away, he accidentally breaks a light bulb hanging above his head, resulting in an electric shock. As soon as he recovers a few moments later, he immediately agrees with Fry's plan, and they manage to escape. Some fans of the show have suggested that this is the very moment when Bender becomes the misbehaving character that we've all gotten to know so well, and that if this hadn't happened, he would likely have been a much more easygoing character. But then, as the series entered its 4th season, Bender had yet another personality shift. Fans think that this may be the result of an event that takes place during an episode called Love and Rocket, in which Bender starts dating the Planet Express crew's spaceship.
Now think about that, y'all. Because pretty soon, some of y'all might not want to believe it and trying to run from it and just avoid it. But pretty soon we're going to have to deal with robots on a day-to-day basis. And we may give it a command outside of what it's accustomed or programmed to do. How do we fix that? How do we deal with that? And it may be in one of those type of situations to where it's a live or die situation. And we need to do something outside of what they're programmed to do. How do we go about doing that? Now, I know this situation here is cartoon inspired, but why this may not be, it may be applicable pretty soon, right? So just keep that in the back of your mind. I ain't saying this is going to happen in the future. I'm just saying store that in your memory somewhere.
At one point, he ends the relationship, sending the ship into a self-destructive depression. And to save the crew, Bender merges his programming with that of the ship. The crew manages to make it out alive just by the skin of their teeth. But some fans believe that Bender felt the effects of this merging forever, as afterward he became more understanding and sensitive in subsequent episodes, though he still carried on with most of his beloved hijinks. In episodes to follow, Bender would often dress up as a female robot to disguise himself, but his conceited nature shone through even then, as he on one occasion disguised himself in this manner so that he could win the Women's Robot Olympics. One can only wonder what Bender would have been like if he'd not received that electric shock, and whether he would have been as lovable of a character as he turned out to be, had he not merged with the company's spaceship. Number 9. Those who grew up in the 1990s will no doubt remember the iconic sitcom The Fresh Prince of BelAir, which starred a young Will Smith. It was his first big role as an actor.
Listen, if they showing this picture, then it gotta be the conspiracy of the two Aunt Vivs or something like that. You know what I mean? They showing the motherly side. That's what the first thing I think about.
Actor, and thanks to the show's massive success, he would go on to have a very prosperous career in Hollywood. The show had a very memorable opening theme, in which Smith raps about how he ended up living in BelAir. He explains that he was living in West Philadelphia, where he and his friends spent most of their time on the playground, either relaxing or playing basketball. But on one occasion, he got into a physical altercation with some people who were causing trouble in his neighborhood. And when his mother found out about this, she became worried for his safety and decided to send him to BelAir to live with his wealthy aunt and uncle. He goes on to describe how he hailed a cab, which he describes as rare. And upon arriving in BelAir, he was stunned by how huge his relative's house was.
Now they just showed in the previous picture the old Aunt Viv, and now in this one they showed the new one in the previous picture, and this is the older Aunt Viv, the old one, the first one.
And from there, he becomes the Prince of BelAir. He went on to become one of the most popular kids in his new school, and entertained audiences with his rebellious attitude, which is evidenced by the fact that he's the only student in his school who wears his uniform blazer inside out. This gives him a distinct sense of individuality, a trait that's seen by some of those around him as endearing, while some of the other characters find it to be rather annoying. But this does little to dampen his spirit. While the show hit the mark as far as humor was concerned, it also dealt with more serious issues, such as why Will's father abandoned him when he was still a child, one episode that most fans find particularly interesting. While Will quickly adapted to his new surroundings, he still on occasion mentioned that he missed his old stomping grounds, and in particular his mother, who was still living back in Philadelphia. But he would see her on occasion, as she often visited him in BelAir during holidays. But one fan theory has left people floored, as it suggests that all the events in the show took place in the afterlife. The theory centers on the show's opening theme. Rather than being an introduction to Will's new life, it's been suggested that while the altercation that prompted the move really did take place, Will never walked away and never moved to BelAir. Instead, he ended up in a coma fighting for his life. The lyrics...
Hold on. First of all, this is odd. One conspiracy that doesn't talk about the Aunt Vivs is crazy. This one here is different. We all remember the storyline and how things got started. That song will be forever embedded in our minds. But this thing reads, in The Fresh Prince, Will moves from his parents' house in West Philadelphia to live with wealthy aunt and uncle. One theory claims that Will is actually killed in that fight that is mentioned in the theme song. So on that basketball court where the dude picks him up and twirls him around and things like that, he was actually killed. And it says, and the rare cab is actually God taking him to heaven. BelAir is really heaven. And Will is there coming to terms with issues he had with his estranged aunt and uncle who has also died. His parents only appear in BelAir on special occasions, and that is when they're visiting his grave site. So everybody coming to visit him is that people from back home? I think D.L. Hughley played a friend in the show that was from back home. So I'm guessing he's visiting the gravesite, the mom, the aunts. But what about when he traveled back home and didn't want to leave? Remember that episode? He didn't want to go back to BelAir. Explain that one.
BelAir. Instead, he ended up in a coma fighting for his life. The lyrics explaining that his mother wanted him to move away are said to actually represent her acceptance that Will wasn't going to pull through, and that she had to let him go. The lyrics, quote, I whistled for a cab, and when it came near, the license plate said fresh and it had dice in the mirror. If anything, I could say that this cab was rare, but I thought, forget it, yo homes to BelAir, is said to describe his final acceptance as he passed away. And the cab that takes him to BelAir is actually God guiding him to heaven. Not many people remember that Will had a fiancée, but after his move, he never spoke to her again. He also never gets married or has any children, which the theory suggests is because he's actually in the afterlife. Where the theory falls flat, though, is during a summer when Will returns to Philadelphia, and he once again comes face to face with the difficult life he lived there. While there, his nephew is born, which all but confirms that he never passed away, and continues to experience the different challenges that life throws before him. It's an interesting theory that makes a lot of sense up until a certain point, but most fans preferred to remember Will as the fun-loving young adult who became a household name during the 1990s. Number 8. Fans of The Simpsons will be very familiar with the family's dynamic. Marge, the matriarch, serves as the voice of reason most of the time, though she does on occasion get involved with her own particular brand of hijinks. Maggie, the baby, is silent for almost all of the show's duration, and Lisa is seen as the smart one in the family. She's a vegetarian who has a love for music, which is evident from her saxophone playing, and she can often be seen taking part in one kind of activism or another. Then there's Bart, the fun-loving son who spends most of his time in school, wishing that he was outside riding his skateboard, or that he was at home in front of the TV, watching Itchy and Scratchy cartoons. He struggles academically, but doesn't often let this affect him. Lastly, Homer, the father, is seen as the dunce in the family. Although he works as a safety inspector at a nuclear power plant, he has no idea what any of the machines do, and more often than not, is dull-witted in nature, and it lands him in a lot of trouble.
Oh my God, whoever came up with like the theme for this show is pure genius, bro. The dunce who's a safety inspector at a power plant. What? Oh my God, perfect.
While some of the characters in the show are smarter than others, it would be a stretch to call any of them geniuses, since even the smartest of the bunch, a scientist named Professor Frink, manages to come across as a bit of a dunce since most of his inventions tend to fail catastrophically. But there is one theory that goes against this narrative. It suggests that all the members of The Simpsons are actually geniuses, and that they decided to hide this fact from the rest of the town of Springfield in order to keep their lives a little simpler. The theory suggests that the rest of the family became aware that Lisa, the smart one, never made any friends, and that she on occasion falls into a sort of depression while experiencing bouts of anxiety. Since they're all geniuses, they come up with a way to avoid this feeling by pretending to be just as dim-witted as the rest of the town, and no one ever seems to notice. In fact, one episode lends credence to this theory, as it shows Homer being a genius after a crayon, which was lodged in his brain for years, is removed. But as soon as this is done, his friends begin to realize just how much smarter he's become, and they begin to spend less and less time with him, proving that he would be miserable with a higher IQ. In another episode, we see Marge in her younger days, while she's still a student, and we realize that she's actually pretty smart. Added to this is the fact that she was a terrific painter at one point, but decided to give it up when she and Homer started a family. Bart is seen learning Spanish in the amount of time it takes the family to fly to Brazil. And while this may have been the wrong language, he certainly has an aptitude for learning different languages. While this remains just a theory, it fits in perfectly with the show's plot, and it's easy to see why it's become so popular, even if it is just for a bit of fun. Number 7. The sitcom Frasier remains popular today, despite being aired for the last time in May of 2004. The main character, played by Kelsey Grammer, first appeared in the sitcom Cheers, but he then moved away from Boston to become a radio psychiatrist in Seattle. Here, he rekindles his relationship with his brother, Niles, and his father, Marty. Martin eventually moves in with Frasier, since his mobility has been affected by an injury to his leg that he sustained while working as a police officer. To help speed up the process of his recovery, Frasier hires a physical therapist named Daphne, and soon the three are living together in Frasier's high-rise apartment. Niles eventually falls in love with Daphne amid his failing marriage, and as can be imagined, hilarity ensues. While Daphne does her best to assist Martin as much as possible, it soon becomes apparent that her skills as a physiotherapist are somewhat overrated. But Martin decides to keep her on. Most people believe he did this because of Niles' feelings for her, but a fan theory suggests an alternative motive. While there's no doubt that Daphne's stretching and exercise routines help Martin regain some of his mobility, it's been suggested that he refused to let her go because she understands him better than either of his sons do. And since his wife has long since passed away, she serves as a constant companion. When Martin moved in with Frasier, the two were constantly at loggerheads. But as the series developed, Daphne helped smooth over some of the rough areas in their relationship. And the theory further suggests that this helped Frasier become closer with his father, making her an indispensable part of the narrative. The same is true for the relationship between Frasier and his brother Niles. At first, the two bicker about the smallest things, but Daphne seems to provide them with a down-to-earth perspective on life, making both of their lives much simpler. But the theory goes on to suggest that she's also affected their individual lives positively. Before her arrival, Niles was often seen as miserable, but she seemingly turned this outlook on life around with her quirky ways and friendly nature. As for Frasier, she seems to take very little notice of his need for opulence, and before long, he begins to see that there's more to life than keeping up appearances, though he still enjoys indulging in the finer things in life, such as caviar, foreign cheeses, and champagne. Throughout the show, Martin can be seen following the therapy routine that Daphne has designed for him, but on several occasions, we also see him moving much more freely than he's letting on, only to start limping again as soon as someone else enters the room. The theory posits that if Daphne hadn't remained in Frasier and Martin's lives for as long as she did, their relationship would have cracked under the strain of their different lifestyles, and they would have likely become estranged once more. Hence, to ensure that he can stay close to both his sons, he pretends to be far more affected by his injury than he really is, and in doing so, ensures that Daphne remains an integral part of their family.
I never really got into Frasier. It would come on sometimes, but I think other things that came on caught my attention more than this, so I like see it in passing, like scrolling past it. But never really got into that, so I'm gonna take y'all word for it on this conspiracy theory per se, because I don't know much about it. So, and plus, y'all let me know in the comment section, is this something I should go back and check out? Is it something that they keep playing like reruns on? Like, I have YouTube TV, so I watch like sometimes TV old shows on that. Is that something that they continuously play now? Let me know. I may go back and check it out depending on what y'all say about it and the reviews y'all give it.
Number 6. Bikini Atoll is a set of 23 islands located in the Marshall Islands in the Pacific Ocean. Between 1946 and 1958, the U.S. government used the site to test 24 nuclear weapons. Some were detonated on the reefs beneath the ocean. Others were tested in the air, while others were detonated just beneath the water's surface. But to do this, people living in the area had to be asked to evacuate, and before the first test began, most of the family heads on the islands agreed. Most of the island's residents temporarily moved to Rongerik Atoll and Keeley Islands.
And y'all wonder why some of the things we find in the ocean look the way they do. And have different deformities and different problems or issues and stuff like that. Look at what they were doing in certain areas. And you know this wasn't the only area that probably did this stuff in.
But the U.S. government had to provide them with aid since the living conditions in those areas were awful. They were told that as soon as the testing was over, they would be allowed to return to their homes on the islands, but sadly this wasn't to be. The nuclear tests that had been carried out resulted in massive amounts of radiation lingering in the area, and it remains there today, making it impossible for anyone to live there. The water had become impotable. The soil wouldn't allow for anything to grow. Fishing, which was a massive part of the inhabitants' lives, had now become too dangerous, and they wouldn't ever be able to farm there again. When tests were conducted at the site in 2016, radiation levels were found to be too high for anyone to live there, and the U.S. government has been forced to pay out hundreds of millions of dollars in compensation and aid, since they're responsible for the residents' displacement of their homes. That same survey did, however, find that marine life around the islands is still abundant, and this has given rise to a fan theory regarding the popular children's cartoon SpongeBob SquarePants. The first hint that this theory may have some credibility is the name of the town in which SpongeBob and his friends live, Bikini Bottom. Here he works as a fry cook in the Krusty Krab restaurant, which is owned by the greedy Mr. Krabs. Krabs' enemy is a single plankton who attempts to steal the secret recipe for his burgers every chance he gets. There's also SpongeBob's dim-witted best friend, a starfish named Patrick, his neighbor, a snobbish cashier at the Krusty Krab, a squid named Squidward, and a squirrel named Sandy, who hails from Texas. These are just a few of the very quirky characters that appear in the show, and a fan theory suggests that they got their strange character traits and behaviors as a result of the nuclear testing that was carried out in the area by the US government. While this may seem a bit far-fetched, some of the show's characters and other staff members have stated that they now believe the theory to be correct, and have even pointed out that some of the characters can sometimes be seen wearing clothing from that period. In an episode titled Dying for Pie, SpongeBob attempts to hand a pie to Squidward, but he trips over a rock, sending the pie flying through the air and into Squidward's face, where it then explodes. The footage then cuts to a live-action scene of an atomic explosion, lending even more truth to the strange theory that SpongeBob and his companions are living in radiation-infested waters. It's also been suggested that the nearby strange and desolate town of Rock Bottom has been left to rot as a nuclear wasteland, resulting in the strange language spoken by the characters that live there. Number 5. Dexters Laboratory was one of the most famous Cartoon Network series of the late 90s. During its run between April of 1996 and June of 1998, fans fell in love with his scientific antics and the show's sometimes sci-fi inspired nature, not to mention some of the strange characters that it introduced. Dexter, a boy genius, can be seen hard at work inside of his secret laboratory that he constructed under his family's home. But his parents remain blissfully unaware that he's conducting often dangerous experiments right beneath their noses, despite being baffled by their high energy bill. Only one other member of the family is aware of the existence of the lab, Dexter's sister, Dee Dee. She often inadvertently foils Dexter's plans thanks to her carefree and dim-witted nature, and on more than one occasion, she's responsible for an untold amount of damage that is usually created by her penchant for ballet dancing. But not many people know that Dexter wasn't always meant to be the main character of the show. When its creator was attempting to come up with a new concept for a cartoon, he drew Dee Dee first, and only added Dexter as her brother as an afterthought. But when he and a few other artists got together, they decided that Dexter should become the focus of the show, with Dee Dee acting as a constant annoyance in his life, as well as the love interest of his arch-enemy, another boy genius named Mandark. And so the show continued to develop with Dexter showing his mental prowess in every episode, only to have Dee Dee interfere with his latest invention, equipment, or scientific discovery. But on several occasions, Dexter thinks a little too big and he ends up in trouble. Sometimes his reckless experiments put the entire planet in danger, and it's only thanks to Dee Dee's help that he's able to bring things back to normal. Because of this, a few fans have come up with the theory that the real star of the show is actually his sister, and that she's much smarter than she lets on. It's even been suggested that she's smarter than Dexter and she only pretends to be a dunce, so that she'll still be allowed into his lab to keep a close eye on him and his research. It's also been suggested that Dexter is the one lacking in mental capacity, since he often fails to realize just how dangerous his plans could be, and that he's endangering the lives of his family and sometimes everyone on Earth while trying to make a name for himself in the scientific community. The theory is further proven by the fact that he sometimes puts his own life in danger merely to address a slight annoyance. In one episode, he tires of constantly having to change his lab uniform and hence decides to laminate himself. Then there's the fact that Dexter does his best to keep Dee Dee out of his lab, but despite his elaborate locks and guardian robots, she still manages to find a way in with very little effort, sometimes appearing as if out of thin air, and much to Dexter's frustration. If Dexter really was as smart as he thought he was, it should have been easy for him to find a way to keep Dee Dee out, and hence many fans feel that she's simply allowing him to believe that he's the smarter of the two siblings, when she is actually the genius in the family. Number 4. When it comes to naming the best and most loved sitcoms of all time, Seinfeld is almost always mentioned as one of the frontrunners. The show saw a massive amount of success during the 1990s, and before long, its main characters had become household names.
Be honest. A lot of people won't be honest. Be honest. How do you feel about Seinfeld now, after everything went down with Kramer and everything that happened, you know? I didn't really watch it, but I knew of it through people. And I knew people loved the show. And then Kramer said all those racist things and different things he said or whatever happened. I don't recall, but I remember hearing about it. I remember that going down, and it kind of stained the show or put a bad taste in people's mouth towards the show. So, but before that, it was held high. So I want to know, I want to ask y'all, how do y'all feel then, now?
And before long, its main characters had become household names. There was Elaine, comedian Jerry Seinfeld's ex-girlfriend, who works as a copywriter's assistant at Pendant Publishing. George, Seinfeld's best friend, who's always looking for true love while attempting to remain employed for as long as possible. And the wacky Kramer, who lives across the hall and who's constantly eating food from Seinfeld's fridge after letting himself into his apartment. As the show developed, these four characters became inseparable, and they often ended up in hilariously awkward situations together, such as getting lost in a multi-story parking lot for an entire day when they're unable to remember where they parked. When they finally find their car later that evening, the engine won't start. While the show is filmed in several different locations, the most familiar is Jerry's apartment. It serves as a kind of headquarters for the main characters, and on occasion, for some of the supporting characters too. During the show's run, each of the characters go through several romantic relationships, which they end up discussing at Jerry's place. In fact, it seemed that they were dating someone new almost every week, and they were constantly in Jerry's apartment, allowing him very little time to himself. But one fan theory has now tried to explain this. It suggests that we as the viewers don't see everything that's going on in the characters' lives, and that there are certain gaps that need to be filled in by the show's audience. Keep in mind that Jerry is a stand-up comedian, and a very successful one at that. Hence, he needs to travel all over the country to earn money, which he has plenty of. While we often hear him talking about catching a taxi to the airport, or see him returning to his apartment with his luggage, this isn't an aspect of the show that's given much screen time. Hence, it's been suggested that his close friends are aware of his touring schedule, and that they don't see him nearly as much as we've been led to believe. When he returns from a tour, his friends are eager to see him, and the best way to do this is to meet him at his apartment. This also explains the strange fact that they're constantly dating new people. Since we don't get to see what happens to the characters while Jerry is away, we're often greeted by a new love interest that's entered the picture in the meantime.
Do y'all notice that a lot of those shows around those times had this similar dynamic? Think about it. Martin, centered in his apartment, right? Had the friends, Tommy, Cole, Pam. Came over, they had different love interests. Well, they didn't always have different love interests. Tommy did sometimes. Cole stuck with Big Shirley, and Pam dated Tommy, but also had different love interests, right? And the dynamic was Martin as a radio host and Gina and him were together. And the different characters that came into that place. Like, think about back during those times, and that dynamic was similar. It just hit me listening to this, though.
This also explains why they always have some tidbit of news to share, and why Jerry is often unaware of what's going on in his friends' lives until they tell him about their latest exploits that happened while he was away. Some fans have added that Jerry may simply have been the most accommodating apartment, or that they're constantly visiting him, since they don't have cell phones at the time. Even though Kramer lives in the same building, and hence should have a similar apartment, he's always over at Jerry's, either raiding the fridge or simply hanging out, sometimes on his own, suggesting that he prefers being there rather than at his own place. Even though it's just a theory, it's fun to think about, and it certainly does explain why Jerry's apartment is always a hub of activity. Number 3. The hugely popular cartoon, Pinky and the Brain, aired its last episode in 1998. But since then, it's become somewhat of a cult classic. Fans of the show first encountered the two lab mice in 1993 as characters of the Animaniacs cartoons, but they proved to be so popular that they received their own spin-off TV show. Brain was portrayed as a genius, while his sidekick, Pinky, seemed to know very little about anything, and on occasion ended up accidentally thwarting their plans to take over the world, an endeavor that they pursued in every single episode with varying amounts of success. In many of the episodes, Brain seemed to become irritated and even infuriated at Pinky's stupidity, but remained friends with him since he didn't have anyone else to help him with his quest for world domination. But try as he might, Brain and Pinky always ended up right back in the cage where they started their plan, only to start a new scheme again the next day. Brain often used elaborate pieces of technology to try and bend the world to his will, giving us the impression that he's some kind of genius lab mouse. But according to a theory about the show, this may not actually be the case. Some fans have suggested that Pinky is actually the brains behind the whole operation.
No, we're not doing that. No, we're not doing that, bro. I should just stop. I should stop it right here because y'all not about to do that. No, that ruins the whole like storyline and everything that went along with people's childhood, bro. Don't do that. Y'all not gonna do this.
And they've even provided proof of their claims. The theory started thanks to the show's opening theme song. The lyrics are Pinky and the Brain, one is genius, the other's insane. And we can instantly see which is which, as Brain is seen expertly and effortlessly picking the lock in their cage and working on mathematical problems, while Pinky dances around in a straitjacket. But since the song never explicitly states which of the mice is the genius and which is insane, some fans have suggested that this is actually the other way around. Since Brain's plans always fail, they theorize that he isn't as smart as he thinks he is. Added to this is the fact that his plans are often needlessly elaborate, and that his plans sometimes fail because of his own impatience or unwillingness to listen to his sidekick's advice. This, the theory holds, results in Brain becoming somewhat of a laughingstock in the eyes of the audience. Furthermore, Brain isn't the only one who creates plans to take over the world. Pinky has some very bright moments, such as acquiring the keys to every country in the world, which he then gifts to Brain for his birthday. With the means to take over within his hands, Brain then manages to spoil everything thanks to his rude nature, and soon the pair finds themselves back in their cage, ready to start concocting a new strategy. It's also been suggested that Pinky realizes just how smart he is, but decides to hide his intelligence from Brain so that he can focus on having a good time during their adventures, rather than becoming bogged down by their attempts to overthrow mankind. Since both mice were subjected to the same experiments that resulted in them being able to talk, there's no reason for Brain to be any smarter than Pinky, but Pinky seems to care less about attaining power, and instead relishes in the simple things in life, which seemingly pass Brain by without his knowledge. Number 2. Westworld is a dystopian science fiction drama that graced our screens for 6 years from 2016 to 2022. It featured a massive park known as Westworld, where members of the public could live out several different adventures with the help of artificial life forms known as hosts. The hosts were created to be as lifelike as possible, and are touted by their creators as being virtually indistinguishable from normal human beings. They're programmed to play out whichever scenario they're placed in, but they're given a semblance of free will or improvisation to make the experience as realistic as possible. Since they know nothing of the world outside the park, the hosts can often be seen completely ignoring comments made by their guests about the outside world. They aren't even able to identify certain objects that have been brought into the park, and when asked about them, usually reply that the item doesn't look like anything. When one of the hosts malfunctions or something unexpected happens in the park, the hosts are told that they're merely dreaming. This happens often while maintenance is being done in the park, and ensures that they're able to maintain a sense of continuity among the hosts. While the experiences had by visitors to the park are all simulated, some fans have suggested that this may only be a small part of the actual simulation, which encompasses the rest of the outside world. While those who come to the park for recreational purposes are under the impression that they're stepping into a simulated world for the first time, it's possible that they've been living inside a much larger and more powerful simulation their entire lives, and that they themselves are simulated beings. In fact, some people have gone as far as to suggest that the show might be evidence that we're living in a simulated environment. While the theory that we may be living inside a computer simulation isn't a new one, the addition of the show to that theory is quite interesting. Rather than being artificial, programmed beings that continue to live our lives as normal every day, It posits that we may be part of a massive Westworld-style universe where we serve as entertainment to visitors. This would explain why we've been unable to explore space as easily as we would like, and why we still know so little about our universe, despite conducting centuries worth of research on the planets and stars around us. Furthermore, it would be very easy for our creators to hide the fact that we aren't actually alive. It would be as simple as adding the appropriate programming to our systems, and since we would have little to no free will, we would never feel the urge to find out whether we are, in fact, living, breathing beings. The theory suggests that Earth is a kind of amusement park that's been populated by humans. We go to work, raise our kids, play sports, watch television, and go about our everyday business, unaware that we're being watched by members of alien races who find our antics most amusing. It's said that this would explain sightings of extraterrestrial craft.
I know this is hard for y'all to hear. Don't reject it or just become apprehensive. Don't do that. Just take it in and sit with it a moment. That's all I'm asking. Just sit with that theory for a moment. And just think about it. And think about it. And think some more about it. Don't react. Just think about that theory. That's a good one. That's a good, and I've never seen this show, but God, oh, it makes me want to go watch, man. They hit the nail on the head, especially with connecting with me.
Around the world, in the belief held by some that aliens walk among us. They may simply be on holiday and living out one of their own chosen adventures while appearing to us as human, since we're unable to recognize anything that isn't part of our simulated experience. This theory has gained a lot of popularity online, since it's akin to the simulated reality theory, and fans of Westworld have found it to be particularly intriguing. Number 1. Avatar: The Last Airbender is a well-loved animated series that aired for the first time in 2005, and concluded with a television movie in 2008. Each of the 3 seasons is referred to as books, while each episode in that season is called a chapter. It tells the tale of 4 different nations living in a fantasy universe. Each nation has the ability to control one of the 4 elements: fire, water, earth, and air, but they're at war with each other, each nation trying to establish dominion over the others. For the war to come to an end, an avatar needs to be born, and we meet this character in the form of a 12-year-old boy named Aang. He's able to control all 4 elements, but before he can do so, he needs to learn how to control fire, water, and earth, since his natural ability makes him an airbender. The series is set in a strange world, filled with weird creatures and spectacular vistas. But some fans think that it may actually be set on Earth, only during a different time. Since the characters look exactly like humans, use fighting styles known to us, and encounter architecture very similar to ours, they believe it may be set in the far future. The theory suggests that most of the life forms on Earth have been wiped out by an apocalyptic event that not only erased our existence, but resulted in the characters of the show having no knowledge that we ever existed. If this mass extinction was caused by a nuclear event, it would also explain why the world is now filled with these strange animals that we've never encountered before, and why it has such a devastating global effect. The radiation left behind by this event may then have caused the new humans to develop strange abilities, which are evidenced by the bending powers that each of the nations possesses: air, fire, water, and earthbending. Others have suggested that the event didn't wipe out all life on Earth, but that a few humans somehow managed to survive. As the years passed, they lost all memory of the humans that used to live on the planet, and as radiation continued to affect the environment, animals underwent strange mutations, and humans started to develop powers that allowed them to manipulate the elements around them. Another theory states that humans were able to create powerful AI beings before they were destroyed, and that these are represented in the New World by the spirits that we see in the show. They consider themselves to be superior beings and look down on humans, since they remember the fact that we're responsible for our own demise. They also consider us as a threat, since there's always the chance that humans will fall back into their old habits, which is evidenced by the fact that there's already a global war going on at the start of the show. Some fans have gone as far as to theorize that the entire Avatar series is set in what we know as Asia, and that the Fire Nation represents Japan, while the Earth Nation is meant to be living in China. Thanks to the strange nature of this show, it's been the subject of many different fan theories, some of which make more sense than others. But what is certain is that it's a show that'll be remembered and rewatched for a very long time to come.